The Argentine government expects to reach an agreement with the International Monetary Fund this week on the renegotiation of the country's record debt. The United States has finally delivered its written response to Russia's security demands after a month of escalating tensions. The Ethiopian government announced on Wednesday it had decided to lift the 6-month state of emergency ahead of its expiration amid an improving security situation. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Argentina, where the government expects to reach an agreement with the International Monetary Fund this week, ahead of a Friday deadline for a payment of more than $700 million. Following extended efforts, President Alberto Fernandez expects the IMF to inform that it accepts the economic program proposed by Argentina, clearing the way for a renegotiation of the record debt agreed by the previous administration of Mauricio Macri in 2018. The government noted that political solutions with the US government and a better understanding between the team headed by Economy Minister Martin Guzman and the firm's technicians on the fine print had allowed to overcome the obstacles that had kept the negotiations on hold. The Fernandez government has repeatedly stressed that it will not accept an agreement that implies structural adjustment or puts a brake on economic growth. In Bolivia, news of the arrest in Brazil of the chief suspect in one of the biggest political corruption scandals in the country was welcomed. It was also announced that extradition proceedings are underway. Our correspondent Freddy Morales has the story.
The Ministry of Government announced the arrest of Antonio Parada Vaca, a Bolivian citizen who fled to Brazil after the revelation of one of the largest cases of political corruption in recent times. Interpol in France has activated the corresponding red alert label, and the authorities of Brazil's neighboring country have complied with international law. The state prosecutor's office reported that the arrest of the citizen Parada Vaca took place while he was carrying out a procedure in the Brazilian border city of Corumba, and he was immediately transferred to the prison in that city.
Preventive detention for extradition purposes through diplomatic channels is required by the Mercosur Agreement. Then we will formalize within a period of 40 days, as established by the Mercosur Agreement, and finally complete and present all the evidence to achieve the extradition.
The Legislative Assembly announced that it will form a special commission to assist in the investigations conducted by the Commission of Prosecutors. It has to be a special commission that allows to clarify all these facts of political corruption, mainly the phantom items. It is not a parallel instance, but rather it will contribute to reveal new elements linked to participants of these facts. The case refers to fictitious positions in the mayor's office of the city of Santa Cruz, controlled by right-wing sectors. A person was offered $50 to lend his or her identity for a public position, and the criminal organization collected for more than 7 years the rest of the salary, which fluctuated between $600 and $1,000, including Christmas bonus. It is suspected that the phantom items may be thousands.
Freddy Morales, teleSUR, Bolivia.
The director of the Pan American Health Organization warned on Wednesday that there has been a 32% increase in COVID-19 cases reported in the Americas in the past week. During an online conference with regional officials, PAHO Director Carissa Etienne stated that Omicron has become the dominant COVID strain in the region. She also warned that there could be outbreaks of other diseases because fewer children are getting routine vaccinations against things like measles due to the pressure on health clinics, citing an outbreak of measles in Brazil and diphtheria outbreak in the Dominican Republic.
In the last week, more than 8 million new COVID-19 cases were reported in our region. This is the highest number of weekly cases since the pandemic started, and it is 32% higher than the previous week. COVID cases are spreading more actively and more quickly than ever before. It is clear that Omicron has become the predominant SARS-CoV-2 strain in our region at this moment.
Nigeria has launched a new coronavirus vaccination drive as the Omicron variant spreads. Authorities in the capital launched a new campaign using mobile vaccination units in order to reach more people. Trucks with banners and speakers announcing that the vaccination is free and safe have been deployed across markets in the capital Abuja, followed by health workers in vans ready to administer shots. Health officials have set an ambitious goal of vaccinating more than a quarter of the population by February. While vaccine hesitancy has been high, the country's vaccination rate has nearly doubled over the past few weeks. Denmark's government has announced it will be removing all remaining coronavirus measures from February 1st. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen addressed the nation saying Denmark would be completely open again and that while the pandemic continues, the government believes the country has overcome the critical phase of the outbreak. It was not clear what restrictions will end, but they will likely include the digital health pass, which is currently required to enter museums, nightclubs, cafes and to be seated indoors in restaurants. People aged over 15 must also flash the pass when attending outdoor events where the capacity exceeds 2,000.
Good evening and welcome. We have held 26 news conferences about coronavirus here in Spemsalem, and it can be difficult to distinguish them from each other, but common to most has been that we have spoken with serious tone and delivered difficult messages. Tonight we can start lowering our shoulders and start finding the right smile again. For tonight and today, it is a milestone. We are here with the incredible good news. We can now remove the last coronavirus restrictions in Denmark. From February the 1st, in only a few days, Denmark will be open again, completely open. It marks a transition to a new time for all of us. During the pandemic, our patience and our perseverance and our unity as Danes has been tested. And today we can say that we have passed the test. We are ready to step out of the shadow of coronavirus. We say goodbye to the restrictions and welcome to the life we knew before coronavirus. The pandemic is still here, but with what we know now, we who stand here dare to believe that we are through the critical phase.
A vaccination campaign for children aged 5 to 11 began in Romania on Wednesday as the country sees a massive spike in COVID-19 infections. The daily record of 35,000 cases also comes with an increase in deaths following the arrival of Omicron. Only a month ago, the country experienced a daily average of a little below 1,000 infections. Romania has suffered almost 60,000 COVID-19 related deaths since the pandemic began and stands as Europe's second least vaccinated nation, with just 41% of its population fully inoculated compared to the EU average of 70%.
We were not necessarily eager to come and take the vaccine, but she will go on a trip in the next period and then after that in various other trips, and the vaccine is necessary. But this is also for herself and for us around her, and she knows that she needs to respect the other around her.
I don't want them to have problems. Some parents have doubts because testing period for children was not too long and there were only 3,000 children tested, from what I read. I thought we should move forward because the technology is much more advanced and we can compare this to what we used to have in the past, like other parents do.
A donation of 1 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines arrived in the Gaza Strip on Wednesday. Gaza Health Ministry spokesman Mahmoud Hamad told journalists that the consignment of the Russian-made Sputnik V vaccine marked the largest single shipment of COVID vaccines to the Israeli blockaded territory. The vaccines were delivered through Gaza's Rafah crossing with Egypt, the only one not controlled by the Israeli regime. Meanwhile, the ministry's head of preventive medicine warned that Gaza's health system was under increased strain due to the fast-spreading Omicron variant of the coronavirus.
The Sputnik vaccine. We have already received about 500,000 doses and we are waiting for the shipment to be completed. The quantity of the vaccine that we have received is good, and if vaccine continues for citizens at the same pace, we will certainly benefit from a large part of this shipment.
And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The United States has finally delivered its written response to Russia's security demands after a month of escalating tensions. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced Wednesday that Washington had set out a serious diplomatic path to resolve the conflict over Ukraine, but stressed that the ball was in Russia's court. The press conference offered little details on the response, but Blinken stressed that the U.S. position remained the same. He also reiterated the U.S. commitment to an open doors policy regarding the North Atlantic Treaty Organization alliance, dashing hopes of a guarantee on Russia's demand that Ukraine would not be allowed to join the military alliance. And the Russian Foreign Ministry confirmed on Wednesday that the United States had delivered a much-awaited written response to Moscow's security demands on Ukraine and NATO expansion. The ministry said U.S. Ambassador to Moscow John Sullivan handed over the response to Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko. The U.S. hasn't made its response public, but has stressed that Russia's top demands are unacceptable. Amid a major propaganda campaign and military deployment in neighbouring Ukraine, as the West falsely accuses Russia of planning an invasion, Moscow has demanded guarantees that NATO will never admit Ukraine or any other ex-Soviet nations as members, and that the alliance will roll back its military encirclement of Russia. Meanwhile, the US continues to send military equipment and weapons to Ukraine and has signalled the possible deployment of 8,500 troops. In another bid to defuse tensions, envoys from Russia, Ukraine, France and Germany met Wednesday for more than 5 hours in Paris to discuss the separatist conflict in Ukraine. Russia's representative noted that there was no breakthrough at the so-called Normandy format talks, but that participants have promised to talks in 2 weeks in Berlin. France and Germany have joined the United States in warning Russia against a supposed invasion of Ukraine, something Moscow has repeatedly dismissed, but have been less direct about sanctions. Germany's new coalition government has sent mixed signals on whether it would sever the soon-to-open Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia, which will circumvent Ukraine to provide gas to Europe's largest economy. Meanwhile, the United States continues to issue threats.
Our talks were not simple, but they were perhaps the first frank talks in order to do an inventory of all the problems related to the implementation of the Minsk agreement. We agree that despite all the difference in interpretation of the Minsk agreement that exists between Ukraine and representatives of certain regions of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, the ceasefire must be accepted unconditionally, and the agreement that was signed on July 22, 2020 must be implemented by both parties. Our colleagues agreed that it is still necessary to take a break, to think and come out to discuss and resolve all those contradictions that exist today. And unfortunately, there are quite a few of them.
Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi made a rare visit to the border with Syria on Wednesday to express support for troops and boost morale. The visit came in the midst of an escalation of attacks by the Islamic State group, which have affected both Iraq and neighbouring Syria, leading to fears that the terrorists are gaining ground as they exploit a security vacuum in the country's north, perpetuated by territorial disputes. Meanwhile, Syria has announced that illegal United States occupation troops are aiding the terrorist groups in their bid to overthrow the Syrian government and continue stealing the country's resources. A critical humanitarian situation is escalating in the northeastern Syrian province of Hasakeh, where for the 5th consecutive day, thousands of families continue to be displaced as a result of attacks by Daesh terrorists and air bombardments by the US occupation forces and their separatist militia, the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces. Our correspondent Hisham Wanas has the details.
More than 3,900 families had to leave their homes in the southern neighborhoods of Hasakeh and went to temporary lodging centers in government-controlled areas through the corridors set up by the Syrian army. A critical humanitarian situation amidst harsh weather conditions, which prompted Damascus to urge UN organizations and other international humanitarian agencies to take all measures to provide assistance to these distressed families.
The situation is difficult because due to the bombings, the attacks and the destruction, we have to flee our homes only with our clothes and to save our children and our life. And here we are in a shelter where we receive the support of the authorities within their means, and yet the assistance is not enough and we do not know what to do or where to go.
Despite the total absence of international humanitarian and relief organizations, the Syrian authorities, in cooperation with the Syrian Red Crescent and some charity organizations, have continued to provide assistance to displaced families in Hasakeh, a work that Damascus denounced clashes against coercive measures imposed on Syria by countries that claim to defend human rights.
The chaos spread in our neighborhood due to the air bombings and attacks by the armed forces, and we were forced to flee and come to this place where the aid is not enough and does not reach all the displaced people because there are not enough killed, not enough food, not enough space, and we do not know where we can go.
In the meantime, Damascus denounces that under the pretext of pursuing escaped terrorists from a prison under the control of pro-U.S. separatist militias, Washington is continuing its air bombardment of northeastern Syria in a new attempt to recycle the Daesh terrorist entity to justify its legal military presence on Syrian soil.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The Ethiopian government announced on Wednesday it had decided to end the 6-month state of emergency decreed in November ahead of its expiration amid an improving security situation. The decision came in an extraordinary session of the Council of Ministers and is pending endorsement by the lower house of Parliament, according to a statement issued by the Prime Minister's office. The government declared the state of emergency in early November to curtail the advancement of forces of the Tigray People's Liberation Front as they appeared close to reaching the capital. Over the past month, the Ethiopian National Defence Forces have managed to push back forces loyal to the rebel TPLF to the northern Tigray region, where the conflict broke out in 2020. The massacre in Yemen continues. The Saudi-led coalition launched a full-out offensive against the capital Sana'a and its surroundings. On Tuesday night, the coalition led by Saudi Arabia carried out over 20 airstrikes on Yemen's capital, targeting the international airport and the Al-Dalami airbase. The conflict has escalated over the past 2 weeks as the Houthi movement has also launched attacks on the United Arab Emirates, part of the intervening coalition, which has been bombarding parts of the country for weeks. The conflict has killed tens of thousands of civilians and fighters in Yemen and created the world's biggest humanitarian disaster in the Arab world's poorest country. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres told the Security Council on Wednesday that Afghanistan is hanging by a thread. The UN chief called for countries to authorise all transactions needed to carry out humanitarian activities in the country. He also pushed for a suspension of any rules or conditions constricting life-saving aid operations as millions suffer extreme hunger. Some $9.5 billion in Afghan central bank reserves remain blocked abroad, and international aid has dried up since the Taliban returned to power in August, as donors seek to use the money as leverage over the Taliban while ignoring the plight of the population. The United Nations earlier this month appealed for $4.4 billion in humanitarian aid for Afghanistan in 2022, and on Wednesday said it needed a further $3.6 billion.
We need to suspend the rules and conditions that constrict not only Afghanistan's economy but our life-saving operations. At this moment of maximum need, these rules must be seriously reviewed. International funding must be allowed to pay the salaries of public sector workers. From surgeons and nurses to teachers, sanitation workers and electricians, all are vital to keeping systems up and running, and they are critical to Afghanistan's future. We need to give them a reason to stay in the country. Time is of the essence. Without action, lives will be lost and despair and extremism will grow. A collapse of the Afghan economy could lead to a massive exodus of people fleeing the country. As a moral imperative and a practical one, all doors must be kept open for women and girls, in schools, in the workplace, in the halls of justice, and across all aspects of public life. Opportunities for a new beginning are rare. We urge the Taliban to seize this moment and garner international trust and goodwill by recognizing and upholding the basic human rights that belong to every girl and woman.
Chinese Premier Li Keqiang held a virtual meeting with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Wednesday as the two discussed their bilateral relations. Both sides called to strengthen exchanges and cooperation. Li said China is willing to work with the Netherlands to strengthen political mutual trust, advance practical cooperation, enhance people-to-people exchanges and push for new development in bilateral relations so as to better benefit the two countries and their two peoples. Meanwhile, the Dutch Prime Minister noted that the European Union and China needed to strengthen dialogue and work together to properly handle their differences while jointly addressing global challenges such as the pandemic and climate change. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi reiterated that the United States must lift unilateral sanctions against his country as a preliminary step to establishing a dialogue on the nuclear agreement. In statements to the press, the Iranian president pointed out that only if the other side is ready to lift the oppressive sanctions against the Iranian people will there be a possibility of reactivating the nuclear deal signed in 2015. Meanwhile, spokesman for the U.S. State Department Ned Price indicated that the U.S. is willing to hold direct bilateral and multilateral talks with Iran to quickly reach an understanding for a return to compliance with the nuclear agreement. And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.